really from the outset of him getting out of the car, like it didn't feel normal. It didn't feel like the Dara that I was used to. You know, when people started realizing that Dara wasn't quite right, I think we all got pretty nervous. Relatively quickly, you know, Dara was on his way to the hospital, basically, and everyone was kind of looking around like, what the just happened?
It was very scary to see you, who had always really been very much in control, to be completely what it felt like out of control. You know, you weren't recognizable as the person that I'd known, you know, since my earliest memories.
My name is Dara Sanandaji, and I'd like to take you on a journey of sorts. I've seen and heard a lot in my almost 40 years on this planet, some of which I wish upon no other human being. So if you allow me the kindness, I'd like to take you deep inside who I am and what I've gone through, so that those of you who have experienced something like this know that you're not alone. You're not alone in your suffering, you're not alone in your confusion, and you're not alone in your desire to turn things around. In short, my friends, this film is for you. To start this journey, I wanted to begin with a simple question, a question that had, for various reasons, been on my mind for some time.
What is psychosis?
Well, psychosis is sort of an unusual state of mind or mental state, and there's some various ways of defining it, but probably the most concise way is the following: that there's loss of touch with reality. So the two most common symptoms of psychosis are hallucinations and fixed false beliefs or delusions.
So if I hear someone talking to me and it sounds not like it's in my head, but it's out in the room somewhere, but in fact there's nobody talking to me, so I'm hearing a voice that isn't real, that's an auditory hallucination. Most mental illness involves actually auditory hallucinations more than tactile or visual hallucinations, although in certain disorders those can occur too.
There's a few fairly common categories or types in terms of content of those beliefs. Probably the most common is paranoid, suspicious, or persecutory delusions, dealing with the concern or thought that there's intended harm or things happening in the environment that can do harm to that individual. Grandiose delusions is another common one that's more characteristic of bipolar disorder and mania.
Can you explain delusions of reference?
Oh yes, I forgot that. That's perhaps one of the most common in schizophrenia, at least, and most interesting. Delusions of reference refers to the idea or belief that things in the environment, and oftentimes communication, body language, refer to you in some special manner.
Before I could go any further, though, I had to do a bit of investigation. Investigation into the past, and more importantly, into myself. So I visited my therapist to do just that.
So what's on your mind?
It's been
a little over 16 years, since I was first diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Right.
And, I think it's about time that I kind of go back and figure out what happened, why it happened, and how.
Right. So we probably want to start at the beginning.
I had a plan to drive out to Dartmouth from Chicago.
Right.
I was going to meet up with a friend in Pennsylvania who went to school out there, spend a few days out there, and then head back out to New Hampshire to go to school. And then it turned into like another day, and then all of a sudden it was like, it was Sunday, and I had to be at school the next day, right?
Okay.
We decided to go to the grocery store, but we decided to smoke a little pot before we did that.
Okay.
It was hard to go to sleep, right?
Yeah.
But it was kind of a regular kind of restlessness, right? It was something that I had experienced before. It wasn't anything really out of the ordinary. Then what happened there was when it really all started.
So tell about that.
It turned from like thoughts and a little bit of kind of like strange thoughts and visuals into like I started to hear things.
So at this point you were hearing what?
Thoughts, really. They were thoughts, but they felt like they weren't my own.
Right.
The way I describe it is like, if you're reading something, right? You're reading something and you read it aloud, but it's in your head.
But this was not you
And it's
doing
not
the
me
reading.
doing the reading. Exactly. Exactly.
So that's alarming.
I was a little bit shocked, because if it's not me and I'm not talking, it's somebody has to be speaking to me. Right? Mm-hmm. That's just the way I thought about it. It's got to be telepathy, and it's got to be my friend and his roommates, in the walls, kind of speaking to me through the walls. So there is something that I've just found out, something groundbreaking, something incredible. Like telepathy exists, and I'm experiencing it right now. And it just totally snowballed from there. And then it was like, then I was off to the races. I went outside for a smoke. I had a smoke. I locked myself out of the house. And we're talking like 3, 4 a.m. I got a deck of cards with me, right? I start playing with the deck of cards and figuring stuff out, right? And that's when the symbols started to come.
Okay. So say more about that.
Yeah, and so you have numbers and you have colors on the cards. And things started to mean something. I don't feel like I'm creating meaning for these numbers and colors. It's almost as if they're coming to me.
You've discovered this.
Yes.
And this is somehow the nature of the world or the universe. Or...
You got it. It's the universe opening up to me, showing me what's really out there through meaning. And then it turned into this larger, complex storyline of a war going on, right? There was a war between good and evil.
Okay.
I figured, okay, well, I'm in the middle of this big conflict, right? And it's just raging outside. I mean, there's all these kind of different scenarios and different people and different governments involved and this and that. And then it all started to hit at once. I'm like, okay, well, I got to get out of here. So I jump in the car.
Yeah.
And I just start driving. Then the thoughts change from good and evil, military intelligence, playing cards, colors, numbers, symbols, to aliens.
Okay.
Some beings have evolved that have figured out telepathy and they're communicating with us telepathically. Then as I'm thinking about the aliens, I hit this traffic jam. Boom, car stopped, bumper to bumper. And I'm like, wow, maybe that's something telling me that I shouldn't be thinking about the aliens. There's another element out there that's in my environment, that's around, that's the universe, that tells me to do and not to do certain things. It's not just meaning, but it's direction. So I stop at a hotel. I'm like, I have to get some sleep. And then I turned on one of the late night shows that I had watched for a while. The guy's talking about what's happening to me.
He's not talking to you, but he is sort of talking
about
you.
And then I jump in the shower. I heard a voice in my head, aloud.
Where did it sound like it was coming from?
The drain, somewhere, I don't know. I looked down at the drain, I'm like, okay, it's gotta be coming from somewhere. Where the hell is it? I get out of the hotel and I jump back on the road. I finally get to school. And then I get to the fraternity parking lot. Now I'm gonna have to start to have social interaction.
Yeah.
I gotta convey this to them somehow, right? Like, I know this now, I'm here now. I'm present for the first time, ever, really. And so that's a moment for me, right? That's a heavy moment. But I was talking in codes almost, you know what I mean?
Right, so from their point of view, you were probably not making a lot of sense.
Exactly. So people started to get a little bit worried. And then I just remember that there was people started to come out from upstairs and people started to come in from outside and they're all kind of gathering around. And then they realized that they couldn't really do anything about the situation and they called the cops. I was being transported to the hospital. I remember that. We get to the hospital, emergency part of the hospital. They kind of put me in this little room. Doctor comes in. I don't remember exactly how it went down, but I know that he's like, okay, you have to take this pill. And I was like, no. And he's like, take it. And I'm like, no.
I'm guessing they gave up on that and used the needle.
Boom. Stuck a needle in me.
Righto.
And I'm out.
Yeah.
Fade to black.
Just saying the words out loud to Dr. Kelman definitely helped me to clarify a few things. But even after speaking with him, I still had a lot more to find out. I wanted to get more perspective on the situation. I had to see myself through other people's eyes. So I did a little digging.
In a summer folly, I thought I might get lucky. You've been buzzing round and round my head. I got your little smile, but only for a while before the sun turns red.
So what are we doing today?
Well, we're back, and I went to the hospitals and got all of my medical records.
Right.
So I've just got a whole pile of records. Whole stack of records, yeah.
Okay.
And some of them are just completely sealed. I haven't opened them yet.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
That'll be interesting for us to discover what's in there.
let's see what they say. This is a preliminary unconfirmed report. Date of service 10/8/99 at 5 a.m. Final diagnoses, Axis 1 bipolar disorder. Reason for admission, manic episode, initial episode with delusional thoughts. The patient was admitted with manic symptoms and grandeur and paranoid delusions. The patient has no previous psychiatric history or hospitalizations. The patient's symptoms began 2 weeks prior to admission when the patient was on a road trip from Chicago to Dartmouth, New Hampshire. The patient stopped at a friend's along the way. The patient admits to alcohol use. The patient began to have paranoid delusions of homosexual advances by his friend's roommate. The patient was unable to sleep at night for fear of being raped at night, and secondary to hearing voices in his head calling him a pervert. The patient stayed at a hotel the next night, still hearing voices with ideas of reference. The television was directed at him. His symptoms continued as he traveled to Dartmouth. When he arrived, he believed he had extrasensory perception and hypnotic powers. The patient was taken to security by Dartmouth Medical Center. He continued to have manic symptoms, agitation, pressured speech, with delusions during the day. The patient felt he was a big help to his parents. The patient also continued to have racing thoughts. During his stay, the patient's thoughts were not as racing, began to gain more insight into his disorder. The patient is beginning to understand that depression may accompany mania. Agitation, delusions of paranoia, and grandiosity decreased.
So for me, at first, I thought it was recreational drug related. I thought that perhaps you'd taken some recreational drugs and just had a bad reaction to it. The things that you were saying didn't make any sense. We were watching the cars out of the window of your hospital room, and you were saying that you could predict the pattern of the cars. You had this sort of this this sense that your own brain had superhuman powers.
I was surprised when I got the phone call because it was strange behavior. I didn't know what it was all about. I didn't right away think of drugs or anything like that. I just didn't know what this behavior was.
He seemed really sedated, very slow, very methodical, very uncertain with himself. I think, Dara wanted to say to himself, to a certain degree, I think he was out of his element, especially given my own experiences, and I think the experiences that a lot of folks had with Dara, because he was such a dynamo from everyone's, former 3 years. I mean, you couldn't be in a room without knowing Dara was in the room. Whether you liked it or not, people were kind of dealing with the fact that, old Dara, which I'm sure was the term that people referred to, was not there, and new Dara was kind of more laid back and sedated.
Listen, I knew that you had this illness that you were dealing with. I knew you were on what I thought to be very strong medication. So I thought it best to just kind of let you do your thing, and try to take it easy on you as much as possible.
Obviously, I realized that you weren't yourself. I'm not going to make light of it. You really were not,
What did you think when you first met me?
I thought that you seemed very kind, very quiet, and somebody that I wanted to really take the time to get to know.
Did you think that anything was kind of off? Anything was kind of amiss, maybe?
Perhaps at times. I think less off and more distant, if it can be completely candid, hearing so much of what you were like from Kaz, and hearing, and even mutual friends of ours that you went to college with. So, of course, when I met you was after college, so I saw a much more subdued you.
My first impression of you when I first met you was that you, and I'm not sure I've ever said this to you, was that I thought that you probably had a major mental illness. You continued to have some, I don't know what we want to call it, kind of low-grade psychotic symptoms in which you were having some delusions that you weren't talking about much. At first, you weren't talking about really much at all. It was very hard to communicate with you. One had the sense that you were a little bit half there. If I were a potential friend or somebody socializing with you, that would be quite hard. It felt like there was a kind of emptiness there.
I understood what the hospital, Adam, my family, and Dr. Kelman were saying, but I was still really in the dark in many ways. And after some intense thinking, I came to realize that I just wasn't that well informed about the science behind this type of an experience. I still had a lot more to learn and many more questions to ask. So how does someone get bipolar disorder, and where do psychotic symptoms come from?
The evidence has always been, that there's a family component to these serious mental illnesses. And the evidence has always been that the family component is explained by genetics more than by environment. Because if you take a child who's born to two parents with psychosis, and you adopt that child into a family that's never had psychosis anywhere in the family, that child still has a very greatly increased risk of developing a psychotic illness as he gets into his teens and 20s.
In the latest version of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the authoritative book psychiatric professionals use to diagnose mental health conditions, there are several disorders listed which include criteria for psychotic symptoms. All of these major psychotic conditions have at least some reference to both hallucinations and delusions. But how exactly do genetics play a role here? What are the hard and fast statistics from the research? Well, we can see here that the prevalence for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder in the general population is relatively low. But we can also see that it's pretty clear that these things do tend to run in families. But why and how?
Probably there are a lot of mutations that occur in some of these some of the genes and enzymes that code for these higher level cognitive tasks. And that's where, these mutations plus traumas in the environment and growing up probably lead to long-term psychosis.
Is the determination of it, the cause of it, psychological? No. It is genetic, but is there an interaction? Well, we know that the first episode of mania is very often a result of something highly stressful that results in sleep deprivation, for example. And the easiest way to provoke someone into mania who has the genes for mania is to deprive them of sleep. So that not uncommonly when somebody's 18 years old and they go off to college, they do the two things that we know are most likely to set off an initial mania, which is use alcohol and drugs and to stay up all night studying, partying, whatever.
Psychiatric conditions are not diagnosed the same way as, say, cancer. We don't have a biological test. Brain imaging cannot diagnose psychiatric conditions. So the only thing that we have available is the symptoms that we observe or the symptoms that are mentioned by the family or the patient. So that means we collect symptoms and then we put those symptoms together, and this creates what we call a syndrome, which is not necessarily a disease.
Okay, so let's take a moment here to clarify things a bit. For many folks out there, bipolar disorder may be associated simply with uncontrollable highs and debilitating lows. But to be truly accurate, it's really quite more than that. You see, the classic form of bipolar disorder, bipolar 1, is often characterized by both manic and depressive episodes, or prolonged mood disruptions. Now, by definition in the diagnostic manual, folks diagnosed with bipolar 1 must experience a manic episode at some point in their lifetime, although they might not ever experience depression. Mania is defined in the DSM-5 as a distinct period of abnormally and persistently elevated, expansive or irritable mood, as well as persistently increased activity or energy. These manic symptoms are not simply just highs, such as feeling good or joyful, but they can also be inflated self-esteem or grandiosity, decreased need for sleep, being more talkative than usual or pressured speech, having a flight of ideas or racing thoughts, being easily distracted, an increased interest in purposeful goals and activities, such as in social, work, school, or intimate environments, or unintentional activities such as fidgeting, pacing, or hand-wringing, and excessive involvement in risky and potentially painful behavior, such as unrestrained spending, sexual indiscretions, and foolish business investments. At least 3 of these major symptoms listed in the DSM must be a noticeable change from usual behavior and present for at least 1 week to be classified as a manic episode, and therefore warrant a diagnosis of bipolar 1. But this still then begs a question I wanted to ask from the beginning. What about psychosis? Well, although as we said, folks diagnosed with bipolar 1 must experience some form of mania, not everyone diagnosed with mania must experience the hallucinations and delusions of psychosis. So the real difficulty here is that sometimes in bipolar disorder the psychotic symptoms are present, and sometimes not. However, for most of the schizophrenic type and other psychotic conditions in the DSM-5, these psychotic symptoms are a requirement. So what actually is going on here?
These are tough problems. Bipolar, schizophrenia, each of these disorders are complicated, and they're very multi-determined, and this is not a single disorder. We don't know how many kinds of bipolar disorder there are or how many kinds of schizophrenia. It's probably useful to talk about the schizophrenias and to think about this as many, many illnesses. Unfortunately, we use one term for illnesses that are probably very different.
I don't think that these diagnoses are worth much. You know, they help with communication, and they are mostly used for billing insurance companies. In fact, when I got into the field, the clinical wisdom was that, you know, some people with psychosis have schizophrenia and some people have bipolar disorder, and they're really two different kinds of disorders. But now we know that the genes overlap tremendously and people flip back and forth. Often people's diagnosis changes over time, and these are really not specific diseases, and they're not separate disorders either.
Many of the things that we have that we call mental disorders, really 30 years from now, we're probably going to call symptoms. And the underlying nature of the beast could be quite different from what we have now.
Two things. Do I think that bipolar illness can be diagnosed accurately and lead to treatment that saves people's lives? Absolutely, no question about it. Do I think that there is a lot of misdiagnosis? For sure. Overdiagnosis, misdiagnosis. Do we have perfect diagnostic criteria? Clearly not. I don't think anybody would argue that.
How do you personally conceptualize psychosis?
Well, I think there's something that's awry with neural connections. I don't understand what it is. I don't think we do understand what it is, although different people have different kinds of scientific accounts of what is at stake. But I think of psychosis as a condition in which somebody is making judgments about what's real in a way that seems so out of the ballpark sensible to the people around them that they call them sick. So that means, and there's no, absolute, line in the sand. It's partly culturally constructed, but there's also a real thing in the body going on. But so it's this complicated dance.
There's many drugs available, but it is not possible to say this is the right drug for this patient. Sometimes it's just trial and error. The other problem with these drugs that we have available is they only treat symptoms. They don't cure.
Well, if you're talking about bipolar 1 disorder, I think drugs are quite effective. Lithium works very well in maybe 60% of people. It's a very effective drug. It remains the gold standard for treatment.
Okay, so most of you have probably heard of lithium before. Many of you who have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder may have even been prescribed the drug. How is it actually used for mania? So we now know that lithium and other mood stabilizers may often help to reduce or prevent the mood disruptions associated with bipolar disorder. Therefore, if these drugs do help an episode to pass or even prevent it from happening, then they may be reducing or preventing the psychotic symptoms of bipolar disorder as well. But then again, what if the psychotic symptoms don't go away? What about all the other psychotic conditions? How are those acute psychotic symptoms treated?
You know, the drugs that I know the most about are what called antipsychotic drugs that are considered the mainstay of treatment for people who have psychotic illness or who have bipolar illness with psychotic features.
So okay, we can now see that antipsychotics can sometimes be used for both the classic manic symptoms of bipolar disorder, as well as the psychotic symptoms associated with bipolar psychosis and other psychotic conditions. But I was still quite curious, what do these antipsychotic drugs actually do in the brain?
They block a neurotransmitter called dopamine in the middle of the brain, and that seems to block psychotic symptoms for a lot of people. But they block dopamine everywhere else in the brain, too. The essential problem is we know so little about the brain that, we don't have a rational way of developing antipsychotic drugs.
To be honest, the treatments we have now are still not good enough for a lot of people. So even that rare person who gets the combination of treatments that we have today at the highest quality with the most rapid access, I'd love to say that all of those people are going to fully recover and be essentially cured. And that's not the case. These are tough problems. We're going to have to come up with better treatments than what we have to offer today.
We've continued to develop lots of effective treatments in the psychological area and in the social environmental area, but the psychiatrists don't get really trained in any of that stuff anymore, and they don't know about it.
You know, things are imperfect. Life is imperfect, but it doesn't mean you can't treat people, because we actually save a lot of lives in treating these illnesses. Bipolar illness has a very high death rate, and particularly in young people. And so, you know, you want to get it right. This sort of thing is a collaborative thing here. It's not you're saying as a clinician, you know, you've got to take this drug, you're going to die, because it may work sometimes. It probably shouldn't work. You know, you oughtn't to be able to have that kind of paternalistic medicine views these days.
What is your opinion generally about medication in treating bipolar disorder and how it works?
Well, I think, you know, in our clinic, we have individuals receiving treatment who embrace the medical model to a fault. So they're asking for medicines for marital problems, you know, and they don't work for everything. The medicines can combine very well with psychotherapies, and it seems like the people who end up doing the best are folks who do whatever it takes to feel well. There are folks who are overly dogmatic in one camp or the other. Some people who would not, under any circumstances, take any medicine, and other folks who would not, under any circumstances, do any psychotherapy, which is too bad.
So you want to bring all you can to bear on the person's ability to deal with their experience so that they interpret it in a way that minimizes the sense of a personal assault and that maximizes the sense of personal control.
Now, for me personally, I had known a lot about these different types of treatments through the many meds I had been prescribed over the years, as well as through some extensive therapy. But even so, throughout the next decade or so following my first experience with psychosis, I had been in really bad shape. In fact, I was still hearing the thoughts and the whispers in my head, constantly. Sometimes it was every minute of every day. It was an internal torture chamber that I thought I would never be able to escape from. But I knew without a doubt that I had to survive. So I did some intense introspection. I completely deconstructed my mind, all the way to the core. I finally learned to be honest with myself about how I had been thinking and how I had been acting. In exploring those deep, dark recesses of my mind, I came to some profound conclusions about who I was. More importantly, about who I really wanted to be. In short, I discovered myself.
You went through a fairly rapid, remarkable transformation. So all of a sudden, it was like I guess I want to say, the real you, the you that I hadn't known so much, started to blossom.
I think while still quite psychotic, you decided, at least in my mind, you decided, I'm going to get myself better. And this was a decision that was made, as far as I can tell, apart from your family, apart from your therapist. And it started to be a explicit road back to sanity.
I'd frankly never seen anything like this. Most folks with significant mental illness causing this kind of interference with their functioning aren't actually functioning very well. And while you certainly were not functioning optimally, I mean, you got through law school, and I have no idea how you did it. I mean, I think you did it by busting your butt. You started hanging out with friends more. I think, by the way, in retrospect, we would say it took you a little titrating to get that right. You were going out drinking a lot for a while, and it was almost as if you picked up where perhaps you must have left off in development. You were engaging at a level that you had just been absent from, as far as I was aware, for some years. And then you got quite manic. I don't know why you got manic. At the time that you did, there may have been some psychological trigger again, but I am not aware of one if there was, and I would tend to think of it as a matter of biological cycling, that for biological reasons we don't fully understand, you got manic at that time. I got a call from your brother who was concerned about you. And from his description, it sounded like you were manic and or getting there and maybe delusional. But you sounded really pretty good when I talked to you. And I think you put on you pulled it together, as it were, to talk to me. So I called your brother back and was somewhat reassuring to him. And then the next morning, I got a call from your dad saying you were missing. And they were trying to reach you and you weren't answering, and he was worried. You did become floridly manic, delusional, and ended up sort of in the street, completely not adequately dressed, because it happened to be winter-ish in Chicago. And I guess some people saw you and were concerned and must have called the police, and you were picked up.
It was a brief, but like a lot of relapses in bipolar illness, a very intense psychotic episode. I was your attending physician here on the inpatient unit. You were very high energy and quite paranoid at the same time. And then there was a pretty quick resolution over a week or 10 days. There was some residual grandiosity that lasted weeks to months. I'm not sure. I'm a believer that once you get your sleep under control, your mind can take into account a lot of stuff. And so I think we worked pretty heavily on getting back on a regular wake-sleep cycle.
Going through that episode in 2012 hit me pretty hard, to say the least. But the way I see it, this wasn't all bad. You see, in my opinion, there's a lot more to this picture. I say this because, although some may find it hard to believe, mania and psychosis can actually teach you a whole lot. You teach a whole lot not only about yourself, but about the world around you as well. Because from my experience, being thrown into this netherworld, as I'll call it here, always involves deep investigations into what our world actually is, and how it operates. And even though these experiences may seem somewhat off the wall or ultimately just crazy to onlookers, they really do have the potential to open our eyes to new patterns and connections. Patterns and connections all around us that the rest of the sane world may not even give a second look. And in my estimation, the moment we begin to question the notion of our standard and given reality is the moment we begin to discover our most profound truths about what it actually is. Most importantly, though, if we take these things, like anything else in life, as positive learning experiences, then we can effectively evolve from our current state of mind. We can see the things around us and within us differently. We can understand other perspectives and ways of being in a more empathetic and compassionate way. We can open our minds to new, fresh, and breakthrough ideas. And then we can do something with this newfound knowledge. We can utilize all the gifts, talents, and skills we can muster to aspire, inspire, construct, build up, and yes, create.
You can enumerate, as we have, the disadvantages of being psychotic as a trait. It's possible that being psychotic has some advantages. And one of them may have to do with creativity. One could think, for example, being manic just involves sort of rapid thinking and a whole flow of ideas. And possibly it leads also to a certain loosening of some of the strictures that we may in general have, which may allow for creativity.
So there is an element of making these connections, which I think is at the heart of a lot of art, probably at the heart of a lot of science.
We did some standard creativity tests, and what we found was that patients in our clinic scored on these creativity tests in the same range as fine arts students, product design students, and writing fellows here at Stanford. This combination of changeable and at times negative mood and open-minded and intuitive thought processes could underlie the bipolar advantage with respect to creativity.
Enabling people to see that psychosis can be a creative experience that changes people, that enables them to understand something about the spiritual depths and heights of human experience, that actually can change the way people think about it.
Now, although I had been experiencing these feelings and seeing these connections all around me all the time, I had never really felt that I was that creative. But you know, all throughout that time since I was first diagnosed, and especially after that 2012 episode, I'd done a lot of thinking, and I do mean a lot. But now it was finally time for me to do something. I needed some type of an open and honest release. So I dug deep inside and took all that latent creative energy burning within, and I put it to some solid, practical use. So what did I do then, you might ask? Well, I decided to pour it all out on paper.
The manuscript I wrote, what were your thoughts when you read that the next year?
Oh, well, I didn't know any of that was going on. I mean, I said, oh, my poor boy, what has he been through? Oh, my God, it was just, a big revelation.
You threw the yokes away. You said, I'm not ashamed of all of this stuff. This is what I've gone through. It's behind me. Now I'm going to have a new life. Everything is going to be much better. And that's the way I look at it. I don't think I've ever had any presence better than the 6 or 7 videos that you made about our life. And for somebody to appreciate that and actually put it on film, for me, was an incredible gift.
And you really came to feel that film is a powerful medium through which to express the kind of stuff that you were really wanting to express then. And I think it was a huge developmental leap that you were primed to make that had been on hold for years, and you jumped into it and started to do it in that way.
I think that's pretty much the secret of having a happy life, is finding what you like to do, and then you go ahead and do it.
You were able to call on a part of yourself to scrutinize what you were doing and how you were experiencing things and to question it. That's pretty much exactly what you try to do in talking therapy.
When I talk about mastery, I'm really talking about psychological mastery. I wouldn't normally include in that, or at least I'm not thinking usually when I say that about mastery over biologically driven phenomena like psychosis. On the other hand, that ends up being an experience that you have. And it does seem as though you have achieved some mastery over that, to where you can manage those low-level psychotic experiences from the point of view of knowing yourself. You are immensely and surprisingly mentally healthy considering where you've been.
Dara is functioning. Dara is actually functioning in society. And he took whatever would be a negative situation, perceived to be a negative situation, and he used it for fuel And it propelled him to go out here and do something. And he doesn't blame external forces and things for his current situation. He just gets up and goes.
Now, without a doubt, I found my doctor's and Freddie's words about my experience to be both insightful and inspiring. But from my perspective, there's even more to this story. You see, I was thrust into this situation at age 21. Not only was I by and large an immature and self-involved young man at the time, but I also felt confused, somehow even betrayed, mostly just alone. Nobody seemed to understand anything at all about what I had experienced. I often felt that many folks weren't even trying to understand. In my mind, throughout that first experience, and actually even up until this present moment, I had seen things, heard things, and felt things. Mind-blowing and earth-shattering things, both vicious and joyous, about this existence that I absolutely knew, with every last bone in my body, were not only accurate, but verifiable as well. But I was the only one who knew, and I couldn't express it to anyone. What I came to realize over the years, though, is that this existence is not really about how much you know, but rather more about how you choose to use your time here. What that means to me is that I'd rather connect with other human beings in a profoundly positive way than to be ultimately enlightened, but terribly alone. So I figured that if I am to live this existence, then I should own it. First, I should take responsibility for my thoughts and actions. Second, I should make my absolute best effort to be an active participant in society rather than a passive onlooker. Third, I should live every moment without fear, regrets, or resentment as if it were my very last. And finally, and most importantly, I should spend my time and energy on what really and truly matters the most to me. And that is what this experience taught me. So then, my next question was, where do we go from here?
My hope is that the gift of science will be not only better treatments, but actually better understanding and better acceptance.
I think it's key for all of us who do research is actually to educate the public, to fight stigma, to collaborate with law enforcement.
Certainly, early identification is very helpful. If the first 2 or 3 episodes are relatively easy to treat, then you want to figure out what's going on and figure it out quickly.
Particularly with schizophrenia, we don't really imagine a positive outcome. There's that. And so trying to think more generously and broadly about the nature of psychosis in general is a good thing.
You always want to get, when you can, the family involved. You always want to educate the family as well. You don't want, this is not an illness for an individual.
There's a lot more openness than there is in other areas of medicine. Think about it, there's psychiatrists, but there's also neurologists, there's clinical psychologists, there are social workers, there are certified peer counselors, there are self-help groups.
Rather than cramming people into a job because we have a job enclave, sweeping the floors in some big building, we ask people what they want to do. And that becomes the driving force for what our goal is.
People don't realize they are part of a social network that, just like oxygen and food and whatever, they need some sort of responsiveness from the environment.
I like to think of what happens in therapy when it goes well is not eradication of our problems or our issues or our tendencies. What happens is that instead you get what I call mastery. And what mastery means and what it allows you is to be aware of yourself and your tendencies, to know something about why you have these tendencies and what they look like, and to be aware of when you're enacting them. And that knowledge, that understanding of yourself empowers you to decide to override those tendencies when it would be adaptive to do that.
If it's your pastor, if it's your mother, if it's your loved one, you have to express it to someone so they can give you some type of feedback, or maybe just listen to you to show that someone cares.
Giving someone the time and the space to find their way is really important.
You can only imagine what the process is in its entirety, but if people can acknowledge that it's a process, you can get people to better health, and you can prevent, I think, consequences that are a lot more dire.
We talk about this all the time. There's nothing, and with our children, there's nothing that's more important to us, obviously, than them being healthy and happy. And the key to happiness that we talk about is having family around and true, meaningful friendships.
So now, having spoken to many experts, professionals, doctors, and some close family about all of this, it's time to come back home. It had been 16 years since my initial experience with psychosis, and I'd been hiding my diagnosis from most of my family and friends the entire time. I guess I was partly embarrassed, partly scared of what they would think of me, maybe just a little sad about the whole thing. It was finally time to let them in.
Things that are going to come out through this, he probably thought through and he's ready to face.
I hope that he takes this, and I know he will, takes this and really with the degree of sympathy and empathy that he has with the individuals that he's trying to help, will be able to touch a lot of lives.
There's another side to this that needs to be just thrown out there with joy and said, yes, you know, you can succeed. You can be happy again.
So where exactly does psychosis come from, and how should we conceptualize it? Well, if we're really honest about it, we have to say that there's a lot that we simply just don't know yet. But in some ways, it doesn't even matter how it arises. You see, for me, it's much, much bigger than that. In the end, what this is really all about is how we think about and treat each other. We have to treat each other much, much better if we're going to get better. We have to listen to each other more. We have to show each other that we're not alone on this planet. And even though some of us might experience the world differently than others, who's to say that these experiences aren't worthy of investigation and teachable moments? Don't get me wrong, though. Folks out there are suffering intensely. And we can and should address that. But what we can't deny is that in the grand scheme of things, we are all human beings. And the simple fact is that it's not just the mentally ill or the psychotics who need to do the healing. It's all of us. And wherever our own personal journeys may take us, what we do with our time here on this earth is our choice. And as for me, well, it's already been quite a trek. The way I see it, my journey's just begun.